Um, so yeah, we're here to talk about Elevate Washington. And before I kind of go into that, I just wanted to give you, and I'll pass it over to Gloria Jordan, who's the lead on the project here in a minute, but a little bit of just context in terms of where this project is housed is at Schools at Washington. And for those of us who don't know us very well, we are a statewide intermediary really focused on supporting the people and organizations who empower youth through expanded learning. And what we're working towards is to achieve equitable access to high quality expanded learning opportunities, and really trying to build an equitable ecosystem of supports for young people, for which like expanded learning and youth programs are really a critical component, often very underinvested in component of what it is to really support young people to thrive. Our work falls in these kind of main areas. We do a lot of quality and training for the field across the state. We also serve as an intermediary grant maker, which has been a role that's actually really grown during the pandemic in particular, working to drive resources to culturally responsive programs across the state. And then policy and advocacy is sort of a smaller in terms of staffing, but really important role that we play, convening coalition across the state. This work around Elevate Washington falls into sort of our field and system building work. So what are those kind of structural components that we need to be able to really move the needle towards equity and invest in this really important, and what I think has become very apparent during the pandemic, critical sector in supporting young people to actually have the underlying infrastructure and support and resourcing needed to really be able to help advance equity in ways that I think we're really uniquely situated to do. So this project, I would say, Gloria will talk a little bit about sort of its origins, but what we see this as really critical to that role, to really building out and supporting an equitable ecosystem for expanded learning and for young people. And there's a lot of demand, a lot of requests for understanding who's out there doing what, for whom, what are the gaps, how can we do this? And it's been a huge challenge even for us in terms of advancing our own strategies, not having access to that information. So this is really a foot forward to say we're going to get there, and we need this information. I'm really proud of what we've been able to build, and it's definitely still got a long way to go to be fully realized. But I think it's a good time to tell you all about it. And we are looking for more partners to be able to sort of take this then to the next level and help it become a more sustainable data system that can help drive more strategic decision-making around policy and funding, as well as directly support programs and families. So with that, I want to pass it to Gloria Jordan, who has been the lead on this project. Really, then we could not have done this without her, brought a lot of data system expertise to the table to help build out what we have today. And so I'm going to turn it over to her, and then we'll open it up for kind of talk through next steps and open up for questions at the end. Go ahead, Gloria.
All right, thank you. Hello. Oh. There we go. All right, so what is Elevate Washington? Elevate is our proprietary youth program data system. As Elizabeth mentioned, it fits into the systems building category of Schools Out's work, and it is the product of a $1.3 million investment from the Gates Foundation over the past 3 years. So the project has operated at Schools Out for the past 3 years with a small staff and vendor team that has worked to create a data platform that is designed to impact programming, funding, systems level strategy, advocacy, and more. So why did we build it? Data is critical to how public and private sectors function. I think we all know that. It's integral to how we live our daily lives. And yet our field, the expanded learning field and youth development, really struggles with data access. Historically, there are projects and systems that have existed in silos because they are designed and funded to serve specific initiatives, or they are targeted at very specific communities. We built Elevate Washington to be comprehensive, to be statewide, and to last. Without quality data and targeted insights, we can't be responsive in a crisis. We are not able to analyze the impact of our investments, and we can't connect families to the programs that they need. As Elizabeth mentioned, there is a consistent demand for reliable data about expanded learning and childcare programming in Washington, and the field really looks to Schools Out Washington for timely data and insights. We get requests for basic information, data points, numbers, and often much more complex analysis several times a month, if not weekly. And those requests are usually very time sensitive and they are policy related. So what is at stake here? What does quality data access mean for our field? It means that we can understand who's being served and by whom, specifically youth and staff demographics based on geographic location. It means that we can monitor the cost and availability of expanded learning programming across the state, and that we can track public and private investment in the expanded learning field. We can also ask and answer questions about specific populations and special initiatives without having to stand up a siloed data collection effort. So good data means that we can better support Washington's youth program providers with tools and resources that might otherwise be out of reach. With a member-based system, we can help providers access and use data to apply for funding and improve programming practices. I think this is generally useful to a lot of different types of providers, but in particular for smaller organizations and grassroots organizations, having access to data tools and resources is just something they wouldn't have otherwise and don't have currently. We can also streamline funding to reporters, or streamline reporting to funders. And we can provide a platform for connection and collaboration with other providers. An example of that, in a recent conversation that I had with a provider in Spokane, they expressed how helpful it would be to see what other organizations were offering for summer programming versus having to call around and leave messages trying to connect with program leadership. With good data, we can ensure that anyone in our state who needs to find a program for a young person can find opportunities and services in their community. And specifically here, I'm talking about making the data available to the public in the youth program directory, which currently exists. We can't improve what we can't see. I often compare the information technology needs of the expanded learning field to public education. As a parent, I think a lot about the districts, the schools, and OSPI's role in public education. So imagine if OSPI didn't collect data from its schools. That seems unthinkable. How would the state know where education gaps are, and how would policymakers and funders know where to invest? If we truly value high quality expanded learning and acknowledge the impact that it has on young people in our communities, then we must invest in data and we must commit to using what we learn to inform our work. So a quick overview of the technology, and once I'm through here, we can take a tour of the member system and the youth program directory and look at very specific aspects of the system. But I'm in this slide, I'm just going to give you a quick overview. So the Elevate Washington data platform consists of 4 main areas. So there is the public-facing marketing website, there is the youth program directory, and then the member system, which is where people log in and report their data. And then there's the data itself. It's important to note that each aspect of the platform is a significant undertaking, requiring specialized expertise to build and maintain and market. A little bit of insight into the data that we have now. So the system currently houses over 1,000 unique user accounts. So those are the individuals that create accounts and then manage their data profiles. And then 1,000 organization records in the data system, and then almost 2,400 program records. So those are unique programs at individual sites around the state. These are really good numbers, and we've made significant progress over the last 3 years in building out the database. But we know that there are many more programs that we need to represent. You can go online right now. You can look at the directory. You can open up the map, and you can see where clearly there must be programs in certain areas. We just need to figure out how to capture that information. So the data itself makes its way into Elevate when providers opt in and enter their information. And this is really the ideal scenario. We can collect data in different ways, but the best case scenario is that providers know about Elevate, are required to report into it, and they create their accounts and they provide their data. That said, we can also add data through programmatic import, and then we also have the ability in the member system to create profiles, organization and site and program profiles. In the last year and a half, we've also been able to mandate and capture additional program information through our various grant-making efforts. This has proved that having a mandate for providers to report in is very effective. So where we're at, we have a really solid foundation that is designed to scale. The most complex and robust aspect of Elevate is the member system, where providers log in and report their data. And our focus in the last year and a half, 2 years, has been on improving user experience and making the initial entry point into the system easier and more friendly for providers. We ask for information, the data itself. We ask for information about staff, youth and staff demographics, program location, funding streams, program offerings, so the different types of program categories and different types of content that's provided. We ask about accessibility and accommodations, and then the basic information that people would need to see when they are using the public directory to evaluate a program. While we ask for a lot of data, the initial setup process takes just a few minutes. And we've put significant resources into building out user management so that partners and funders can also use the member system to access program information. So in the software industry, Elevate Washington can be viewed as an MVP, or minimum viable product, meaning that it has just enough features to become publicly viable as a software product. But it needs to be maintained, and it needs to be optimized, and it needs to be properly staffed and consistently marketed. So from the start, we envisioned a system that could provide not just raw data, but features and insights that make reporting and analysis more efficient and effective for providers and for our partners. Specifically, we want to deliver on features that will add value for our providers and our partners. And we are currently designing data dashboard elements that will make it easier for our users to see their own data points, but also access some aggregate insights that for smaller organizations that don't have a data staff person or a data team, they would just never be able to really get a big picture view of where they sit in the youth program expanded learning landscape. We've also heard from providers that community features, such as a jobs board and a grants database, would be used and very, very nice to have. And just generally, providers, and especially now when so much of the work, and especially at an administrative level, has become virtual, just easier ways to connect with other providers who are doing similar work. So we have this incredible technology framework that's just sort of sitting in the harbor. To use a timely analogy, it's sort of sitting in the harbor waiting for the resources and the people power to unlock its potential. In addition to staffing the project and conducting sustained program content curation, ensuring that the data that providers enter, is good information, or it reads well on the public facing page. We also require digital marketing. We need our partners to require reporting into Elevate. So this is a really big piece. We can market and we can do our own outreach, but a mandate is key to providers opting in and sharing their information. So looking ahead, moving out of startup mode, it's really time to expand our team and kick off our marketing efforts. In order to fully operationalize the project, we need additional internal staffing and data analysis expertise. We need a budget for sustained provider outreach, as I mentioned before, and digital marketing. And we need to retain the current technology service contract and continue with the improvements and the feature enhancements that I was discussing in the previous slide. And we need to build partnerships with funders to raise awareness and establish that reporting mandate. So what is our vision for sustaining this system? From the beginning, we really believed that this would be the type of platform and service model that would require diversified funding streams. Public-private partnerships. We can provide API data access for continuous data sharing between Elevate Washington and other established data systems. That has been the plan and the vision from the beginning. Corporate sponsorships with more and better program data and digital marketing. We can offer corporate partners sponsorship placement in the public directory. Fee for service. Excuse me. We can support new initiatives with customized data management solutions and targeted analysis, meaning on the technical side, we can add sort of additional data sets to the data profiles to capture specific data for a specific initiative. And we can also license the member system technology to organizations outside of Washington. So, we built this from scratch because it didn't exist elsewhere. And the existing out-of-the-box, CRM, customer relationship management tools that sort of reflect the type of functionality that we've created, they just didn't really serve our needs. So we built a custom tool, created this proprietary system, and we can absolutely license that to other organizations, in other states. And then philanthropic investments. Additional immediate seed funding is needed to maintain our current trajectory. So At this point, I'm going to let Elizabeth speak in more detail about some of the opportunities here in these different funding streams.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add to what you said, Gloria, is just a couple of things. So we have some real, some hopeful signs around public investment in youth programs happening right now. So both we've seen a real step up at the state level and also in some locations around the state in terms of public investment, and some good indications that could be growing. So right now there's a youth development work group housed at DCYF that just launched that is charged with developing a recommendation for a long-term public investment in youth development, like a state funding program for youth development would be the first we've ever had in terms of, state investment for youth development as a sector as a whole. So obviously we have some steps to go before we're there, but that will need a data system, right? So this is something that, would be there to help inform what that is, and then could potentially help that move more quickly. Again, that can look a lot of different ways, but we've built something that can be flexible to be able to serve sort of both public agencies and as other, there's a lot of various efforts happening around. We've had a lot of conversations with other data systems, and I think share the value that, first of all, we want to reduce burden on providers, that they should only have to enter their data in one place. So how can we have sort of back-end data share, right? So that they're not having to do this in multiple places, and there's sort of one solid kind of source of truth, whereas we're all kind of, because of course, when there's a need, you have lots of folks sort of stepping up to try to address that need, and the need is real. So we're trying to build this in a way that's holistic, responsive, but ultimately we do need to get to a sustainable funding model, which is not where we are in the phase of the development. So really at this stage, I think the long-term prospects are good, and we really do need to look to private philanthropy to continue to play kind of a really key role at this phase of development of this project as we continue in our advocacy efforts to push on public systems to invest here. So, it's both helps us both give us the data we need to push in our advocacy work, but it also, I think those public systems can start to step in to build the sustainability around this system as well over time. Because I know that, for private philanthropy, typically they're sort of like, we want to do seed investment and then pull out kind of funding model. So we're, I think in terms of thinking about that, we suspect there'll be a role and a need for private philanthropy to be in this in the long run. And I guess I also think this has a lot to offer, at least some foundations supports in their own data access and understanding of programs. And there could be like a real partnership conversation too around what that looks like and what your needs are in terms of your own grant making and investments, but also kind of these larger philanthropic investments, seed investment that we need right now. So our plans today is that we'll reach out to you all, as well as the folks who are going to be looking at the recording and explore whether or not there's some opportunity for a next step conversation around funding into this system. But for now, I'd like to actually just sort of move into, I'm sure you have more questions about the actual system and you haven't actually seen the system. So we can answer questions. Gloria can take us into either the website, the directory, the backend data management, all of it. So I just want to open it up at this point to any questions you have. And then if we have time and there's interest, we can certainly go look into the data system itself.
Elizabeth, if you don't mind, I'd love to add a little bit of voiceover. So not in the form of a particular question, but hey everyone, I'm Marie Sauter with the Gates Foundation, and just have been really impressed by this whole process and wanted to offer a little additional context. So when Gloria mentioned, 1.3 million from the Gates Foundation to build this, that is a portion of the many resources over many years that have developed this collective resource. And I really want to lean on the collective part of it. So I just don't want to leave the impression that, this all could have been built from scratch from one big grant. This has been a movement in the field over many, many years. And I think one of the amazing assets of this resource is that it is as an advocacy and community organizing tool. Really, this is built by the field, by individual providers in the field, according to their demand. It's the field needing and demanding this data resource, and continues to be shaped by the field. So as we get into an era of greater promise of potential greater public investment in this sector, it's an incredible resource to have this field-driven data system so that more of the field, as Elizabeth and Gloria are pointing out, not it's not full coverage, but more of the field can really be informing that public sector evolution toward greater support of youth development. So I think while there are many users of the system, and Gloria and Elizabeth laid out all of the use cases here that are really compelling, one that I feel is really critical here is that it's field driven, and that opportunity doesn't always present itself. So the analogy that Gloria offered in terms of the public education information systems, sometimes folks struggle to get to have the needs of multiple end users met when they really want to understand the state of education. But here, because this is a sector-driven resource, there's more potential for that. So happy to answer questions as well along the way about our engagement with this, but just wanted to offer that additional context.
I appreciate that, Marie. When we were pulling this together, we had gotten some feedback, like, don't spend a lot of time on history. Folks don't need to know that. But that I think that the point being, sort of before Gates invested in this, we actually did have a back-end only registry system that had been invested in by Raikes Foundation, and we were at the sort of, what do we do with this? Do we just let this die, or what do we want to do? What do we need? And we also, WIDEC, Youth Development Executive of King County, had a program directory, and we looked at it and we thought, no, we do want and need to invest in this, and that both of those had been informed a lot by the field. And so we came to Gates with, this is what we think we need, rather than it being the other direction, which I do think is an important distinction. Yeah.
Does anyone have any specific questions or anything you are interested in seeing? Or I can just quickly walk us through some of the views.
Can I ask about geographic coverage, if there's Eastern Washington cases?
Oh, absolutely. Picking up from where this started, this really was initially King County focused, in that was the data that we had. We merged with the King County Youth Program Directory, which was a project that was really spearheaded by Jessica Warner at WIDEC. And so we captured that information, and then we have then been working to expand beyond King County and capture data across the state. So, as I said earlier in the presentation, we're pretty pleased that we've managed to grow to where it's at, but ultimately, we know there's more data out there, but we do have representation on the east side. And through the most recent grant making processes that Schools Out has been leading, we've had the opportunity to capture youth programs, very small, very grassroots. Sometimes they just have one volunteer employee, staff member, and we've been able to really start to capture those smaller organizations all around the state. So I'm just pulling up a map. This is the public map. Anybody can go to Elevate and see what's there. A lot of times I get asked, like, it'd be really great if there was a map that we could look at, but it's here, so you can look at this anytime.
I think we're getting to a point too, Mason, I'll just add that we're getting enough data that I think there are clearly gaps. Like I know there are programs, particularly like rural areas, that we're not capturing. And yet I think the overall trends that you see now align pretty well with what we also see in response to low barrier grant opportunities and other things, that there are just true gaps, geographic gaps across the state. And it's been really helpful to be able to look at that. So looking at that, as well as kind of how applications come in, what we see in the financial data from programs, the geographic differences, and then overlay that with where are young people, where are BIPOC youth, where are youth in poverty, and start to look at those gaps. It gives us some much stronger data around advocating and thinking about how we want to redirect resources to those gaps. So I actually think, there's just a huge amount to be gained by the statewide view in terms of really, and especially at sort of state level advocacy, but also potentially local advocacy outside of sort of Puget Sound region to help bring more awareness to that. So I think we're getting closer to sort of being able to look at this and say, no, that the trends we're seeing, they're real. We know we're not capturing all the programs, but overall what you see as a pattern here is I think a real pattern around at least where programs are tied into funding systems, tied into resources and supports that are supporting young people.
Yeah, that looks great. It's a good start.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna log in to the member system. So I encourage you to, so first you can go to the public site and play around with the map. And you can also create your own account if you are interested and step through that process. As I said, I hope that it's easy. I hope that it's a friendly process. But I'm going to log in, and I'm logging in as a Schools at Washington administrator. So I'm seeing a slightly different view of what people might see, or people will see they're not a Schools at Washington administrator. So the member system is, and the data itself, the architecture of the data itself is structured hierarchically. So we have organizations, sites, and programs. In order to create, to get set up in the system, you must first tell us some brief information about your organization. You must identify one site where programs are located, and then you must identify one program. So in that way, we capture sort of the bare minimum of what would allow us to represent program data on the public facing map. And so again, this is the view that you see if you're a Schools at Washington administrator. You are seeing all of the information. I'll just click into a program profile and give you a sense of what that looks like. So I'm clicking on a test profile. I'm not showing you anyone's specific data. So the profiles, this is one of my favorite. There are so many things to improve. We can always be adding and tweaking and improving, but I'm really pleased with where we're at with this. It's a form and it captures information. You have to input information, but we worked really hard to make it digestible, hopefully, in terms of navigating the profile itself. And so we have program details, so the basic information about programs that we're hoping to capture, some of which is used for aggregate purposes, but a lot of this is really the public facing information. And then we separate out sort of the harder to get information that would be used for aggregate purposes into a demographics tab. And so here we're asking for more specificity about populations served, age range, what number of youth that free and reduced lunch, gender, race and ethnicity, and then special program focus. So this is really digging into the special populations. And then we also recently added in working in partnership with the Play Equity Coalition and a couple different contributors at University of Washington, came up with this aspect of data collection, which is identifying accessibility features of a program. And so if you're searching around on the public site, you might not see a lot of examples of this because we just added it. So not very many providers have provided the data, but it's a new feature that we just rolled out. And then users, I think I mentioned in the presentation that one of our focus, one thing that we focused on and evolving from the original iteration of the system is more sort of powerful, fine-grained user management so that we can invite in not just providers and so a staff, but also partners and funders to be able to access specific cohort data sets and programs. And of course that would involve a data sharing agreement and all of that good stuff. But we have delivered on that very important aspect of the system, making it much more usable for not just us, but our providers and our partners. So that is a really quick overview. Is there anything, any questions or anything particular, anything you'd like to see in particular?
Gloria?
Yeah.
A couple of weedy kind of questions. What does unclaimed mean in the database?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned, the ideal scenario is someone creates a personal account and then they create their profiles and they sort of own that entire process. When we import data, like we did from the King County directory, or we actually add a program on behalf of an organization, say, hey, we know there's a program over there in Issaquah, we want it in our data system, and we're just going to add it. That type of program is considered unclaimed in that there's not a user associated with it. We're the ones that created it. So if you then, as the provider who actually is responsible for the program and the program data as a staff member, finds their program in the public facing directory and says, hey, wait a minute, I need to update this information. How do I do that? Then they log in or create their account, and then they enter the name of the organization, and then they're able to claim the organization. And then at that point, we verify that they are who they are, and then they can proceed with accessing their data profiles, and then it becomes approved.
Got it. Thank you. One more question. How do you ensure that programs are keeping their data current?
How do we all ensure that programs are keeping their data current? So we've really been in kind of startup mode for the last 3 years, and we haven't entered into an explicit reporting cadence, meaning we go out to the providers who are in the system and we say it's time for you to report your data. We'll start that next year. We'll start that in January. Our plan right now is to ask for full reporting once a year, based on the last fiscal year. And then if there is a specific push for a specific type of information, we might go out and ask for that specific information. But right now we are focused on updates once a year for full reporting, and then encouraging providers to keep their public facing information up to date because it is showing up in Google search and in the public directory. That's our aspiration and our plan.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, you offered a couple of kind of quotes from about data requests. and then also offer the context on some of SOA's public partnerships and including distribution of some of the CARES Act funds. And I know that that specific project had benefits both ways in this data, both in terms of being able to then add additional programs to the system that you uncovered through that distribution process. But I wonder if there's also a benefit the other way. So I wonder if you could offer an example of just how, even in its still emerging state, how the data system is helping to inform your public sector partnership.
You know, I think having Gloria, I'll take a stab and if you want to respond. So I'll just say, you know, candidly, at the beginning of the pandemic was just this incredible flurry of requests for data for us. Like we've never, I mean, you know, it's been steady, but it was, and we did not have the data in here to be able to give them anything reliable besides the fact that it was all changing. Like, you know, and that was true, of course, in every data system. But I do think it really underscored for legislators that this data was really important to be able, because they were having to make very major policy decisions very quickly with very little information. So, and that was, which is dangerous, right? I mean, that's just, you're going to land on the wrong policy decision. So, I mean, we're in relationship with the field, and that largely became the way that we work to get the information to try to inform those policies. Now we're getting, you know, closer to being able to have, I think, something more robust. And we've been able, like in our partnerships with both OSPI and with the Department of Commerce, to say we need to use a geographic equity lens around how we do these investments. We need to understand that we are going to get fewer applications from organizations outside of these geographies. And how are we going to consider that in terms of how we want to make grant size, how we want to prioritize investments across geography. Now that we know even more, I think we're taking a sort of another layer of thinking about geography, not just in big regions, but in a little bit more micro and rural, and where we know that there are lots of youth of color, you know, folks, there are lots of young people who would benefit from the programming we're trying to invest in, and just not as many programs. So how do we invest in those programs? And we have seen like growth, also a lot of growth in those regions around those programs really responding. So those are things now we can start to see in the data that I think are a little bit more informing future facing investments. I will say that we even used at the time the data that was in the youth program directory to inform the grant making process for the Best Starts for Kids Out of School Time project back in, what was that, 2017? Yeah, I guess it was then. And we plan to do so again now, going into the renewal of BSK and the expectation that there will be another, you know, investment in expanded learning programs through that. So even within a county, you can look at the disparities in where programs are, the types of programs relative to where young people are, and I think use that to inform how you want to prioritize or think about funding. So that's some of the ways that I see us using it. And I think some of our public partners are using it that way. There's a lot more nuance we can get to and hope to get to, like how do we understand sort of BIPOC-led and other buy-in-for organizations and where they are, and how do we think about strengthening that aspect of our sector, which is, I think, fairly strong relative to other youth serving sectors, but requires a lot of continued investment. Or how do we think about different types of, because there's a lot of diversity, right, in youth programs. So how do we think about where gaps in other ways, not just geography, that I think we can look at over time as the data becomes more robust.
Is there anything specific that anyone would like to see in the member system or the public directory? I forgot to mention, you know, one of one of the best parts, and that is the storytelling aspect of the marketing website. Just being able to present the stories about the providers, about the programs, and on the same public platform as we have our directory and our database. And the more that we're able to, build out the data system, include more programs from across the state, we will continue to look for opportunities to tell stories and just really connect the faces and the community voices to the programs that are the data.
There are no other questions. I think, I would just encourage you to get onto Elevate Washington and look around at the features. We haven't, there's the directory can be pretty fun to play with, but I'm glad you called out the storytelling. But we definitely, as terms of, really trying to keep at center that this does need to benefit providers. So there are sort of system needs, but it has to work for youth and families and providers if it's going to work at all. So really thinking too about what are all the things that help support them directly. And some of them are now, increasingly using it also as a way to sort of be on the map, be sort of especially a lot of small or startup organizations, of which there are a lot from the last couple of years, looking to sort of get more connected within their sector or to families and youth. So that, there's a lot of different features to this, and trying to make it a kind of all work across those needs is a complex equation. But I think we're starting to make some good traction in that regard. So with that, I just want to thank you for coming and spending time, and I really appreciate your interest. And we will, I'll be in touch. And there's lots of different ways that we could partner around this, and it might look different for everybody, even if it's just like, how do we want to do some data sharing, or how do we, or, is there a possibility to talk about a larger investment? Those are sort of the range of conversations we'd like to have, and all of them really matter to the success of the system. So with that, just appreciate you coming. And if you have questions following up, certainly send them our way. And you should have our contact information, but I'll make sure to put mine in the chat. Feel free to reach out, but we'll also be in touch. So, thank you so much.